Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over the top 10 decks in the Phantasmal Flames format. We've only had one regional event so far in this format, so we are going to be looking at some of the online data as well as the metrics from the Stuttgart Regional Championships to try and formulate our top 10 list, looking at some of the best performing decks from that one tournament that we had, but also discussing changes that I've tested and would potentially like to see going into the future based on some of its more awkward matchups and this, that, and the other. So a bit more opinion-based in this top 10 because we only have one tournament to go off of, but I think I have some good insights for the majority of these decks. First of all, let's have the statistical overview with, on the left-hand side of the screen, the limitless points for the Masters Division. So this gives you the sort of more broad strokes overview of how things panned out in Stuttgart. The best performing decks were Golden Go, Dragon Dusk, and Gardevoir Jellicent, with Charizard Pidgeot having a big uptick from Phantasmal Flames, probably the deck that gains the most in the Dawn supporter. We see that not only with the Charizard Pidgeot, but also with the Charizard Noctowl deck, which really sort of came out of the blue. There was some success for some Wellspring Mask Ogerpon builds of Charizard out in Japanese city leagues, but not quite anything that we saw actually ended up taking the win. So that's kind of the biggest impact, I would say, coming out from Phantasmal Flames, that Dawn sprouting a new build of Charizard and breathing life into that archetype. Also, you'll notice that Lopunny Dusknoir there in the 8th best performing position is also a budding archetype that still has some more exploration on how it's going to make a standing in the metagame and have a more solid approach, because its matchup data doesn't look great, although it did have some decent day 2 performances and a few people went fairly far in the event. Also down in that 14th, there's the Kangaskhan Bouffalante deck. This has been an archetype of mine that I'm very intrigued with, and I also think its matchup data is looking really appealing. If you actually look on the right-hand side, Kangas Boof is the 14th most played in the online scene, but its win percentage is really high. Its overall win percentage is 57%. That's something to be noted because it's by far higher than anything else on the list, including Golden Go Lunatone, which is our best performer in Standard. So potentially it's still an underplayed deck in the metagame, and it's something that I've personally put a lot of time into. So it's a deck that I still have my eye on. But those seem to be the biggest changes from Phantasmal Flames. And on the right-hand side of the screen, it's the online popularity of archetypes, which sometimes can give you a good picture of what people are testing, heading up to major tournaments, and generally just give you an idea of what decks sort of change the most and gain the most from Phantasmal Flames, because people love to try out the new toys in the online space where they can have some element of competitive aspect, but ultimately are just sort of feeling the new archetypes out and seeing how they function. Let's get into how I came up with the matchup data that we're going to see on every slide. I'm simply taking from the Stuttgart Regional Championship results for the win percentage here, and that's pretty much it. I've thought about doing it just day 2 filter. That's going to be a far fewer volume of games, but typically more optimal pilots in both seats. But simply because we are talking about some decks like Lopunny, like Kangaskhan, like Flareon, Joltik Box, these sorts of things, they're all in my matchup spread. That in some of these instances in day 2, there's only like a handful or less than a handful of games played into certain archetypes, so it can make the data look really swingy. So that's always going to be a pinch of salt, and again, the data is going to look different if you just turn on a day 2 filter if you're using Limitless Labs. Equally, if you just look at the online data, there's going to be changes here as well. So this is only meant to be a guide. It's not meant to be a this is the definite truth, because it's only been one tournament so far in this metagame to base that data off of, and it changes based on your filters and whatnot. So just going to be giving you a guide of how these matchups go more than anything else. Right, with that said, let's jump into my number 10, Lopunny Dusknoir, a sort of new archetype coming onto the scene. It takes a lot of inspiration from the likes of Palkia Dusknoir or Charizard Dusknoir that we've seen previously, where you really try and limit the game down as quickly as possible and hope that the pressure of an early Gale Thrust, in addition to Curse Blasts, can, in some instances, wipe away like the first Stage 2 attacker that comes on the board straight away, or get rid of a number of evolving Pokemon straight away, that you can really dismantle some setups. That's kind of the core idea of the deck. But ultimately, Lopunny is a 330 hit point 3 prize Pokemon that is vulnerable in some situations. That's why you're seeing the likes of Golden Go and Raging Bolt being poor matchups. Equally, because you have to be popping your Curse Blasters into the Dragapult and the Gardevoir, that can be a little bit awkward, because of course that setup can be picked apart by a Dragapult player. It can also, feed them into a situation where they can lock you out of Duskull later in the game because of their Phantom Dive damage output, so that can hinder your one-hit KO potential. And then for the Gardevoir, if you're not Curse Blasting, again, they have Monkey Dory shenanigans at their disposal. They have higher reach. That's why you'll notice that the regular Guardy is a worse matchup than the Guardy Jelly, because, something like a Drifloon taking a clean KO on a Lopunny is going to really help them close out a game very quickly. So as long as they can develop stage 2s, they should have a decent time into you. That's why I only have Lopunny Dusk at number 10. I think there's definitely a proof of concept with the deck so far, but when you're unfavored into Dragadusk, Guardy, and Golden Go as our sort of top 3 decks in the game of most played and probably best, it's hard to say this is going to be better than a top 10 pick right now, unless the list changes quite drastically. Now, the upside for this deck, it seems to be lower maintenance and easier to play into the Charizard matchup, and it's also decent into other Noctowl decks in the game outside of Raging Bolt, which is pretty promising, and otherwise decent matchup spread. But that top 3 being so awkward is really what puts me off the deck overall. Here's a list then, 28th place from Simon here, and it's a build that includes a 1-1-1 Pidgeot line. It has the Klefki, so you can promote this Pokemon before using your Curse Blast in case you come up against a Psyduck, so you're turning off the damp ability so that you can still blast through your opponent and then use Jet Energy on your Lopunny to get into the active and swing. You also have the Blood Moon Ursaluna EX to be another attacking option in the deck. The Enriching Energy gives you a lot of burst draw to try and make the combos happen on turn 2 of the game. That's one of the big selling points of this deck. You have the Fan Rotom that can help you get Baneri and Pidgey early, and then you can try and Hilda turn 2 for Enriching, and ideally something like Enriching Energy plus Kangaskhan draw can get you towards Rare Candy Pidgeot and Lopunny attack, and oftentimes on top of that, pieces of your Dusknoir combo that can really get blasting off quickly. So pretty cool, pretty disruptive deck, but I do think its matchup spread into the very top echelon of decks is still something to be desired there. In at number 9, we have Ceruledge. This deck seems to have been tumbling down our top 10 recently. It was pretty hyped early on in the Mega Evolution format, and it continues to tumble in Phantasmal Flames. Doesn't really gain much, maybe the odd tech card here or there like Blowtorch, but its matchup data really isn't looking appealing at all. It's relatively inconsistent for what you get out of it compared to other Golden Go counters. Like, that's the big thing trying to prop Ceruledge up, is that you can hit a decent amount of Golden Go, but you could say the same thing for the likes of Flareon and some Zard builds as well, and they have more appealing matchup data. So I feel like Ceruledge still needs to go back to the drawing board, perhaps. I think its engine is reasonable, but I think there are some supporter issues and stuff going on in the deck that makes it unreliable overall as a choice. Again, that same situation of when Gardevoir, Dragapult, and Charizard are all awkward. That's some of our top 5 there, very clearly defined. That's going to be a problem for the archetype. But it does carve out a strange niche for itself where it's decent into Golden Go and Absol. Let's have a look at the 128 finish from Eric here. Does include the one-off Blowtorch instead of any Stadium card, so it can cover you against opposing Special Energy and Tool cards, so it can allow you to get into range of certain Pokemon, as well as having that Counter Stadium as well. It can also allow you to KO a Dragapult whilst removing a Benched Energy, Special Energy on their guy, and then maybe they run out of damage. The main thing that I've tested with Ceruledge recently is just cutting Carmine altogether and choosing to go second with the deck and just going to full research. I think that gives more reliability to this archetype. That's something I haven't really seen much of from the player base, but I feel like the 5 cards from Carmine is just so hideous that I've just gone back to research and said that, with research and Lunacycle, you're at least seeing enough cards to do what you want to do reliably. And that's my personal tip if you want to keep playing this archetype, because right now I think the thing that truly hinders it, I've pinpointed, it's that Carmine is a terrible supporter. In at number 8 then we have Kangaskones, and I might be super biased with this one, but compared to our previous 2, the matchup data is just far more appealing, both in the online scene and in Stuttgart, which is what you're looking at right now, in that it's solid into the Charizard variants, it's solid into Absol, it's solid into the Jelly Guardy, which is kind of the more popular variant right now, although it does seem to be weaker into a build that has the heavier Bravery Charm, Drifloon, the sort of stopping power needed to get through a Kangaskhan, and possibly a bit more of a streamlined build as well that just gets into more games. But it's also even into Dragger Dusk, so its matchup data is like very appealing. The only like glaring unfavored is the Golden Go, and that's an issue that both the Absol Kang sort of toolbox and the Kangaskhan's share. But ultimately, I think this is just like a overstated guy. It's a very simple deck in that you have some great healing with the Jumbo Ice Cream alongside that Curly Wall Bouffalon. You're just like obnoxious to deal with. Like, you're so annoying. And you have Penny in here as well. You have Monkey Dory Adrenabrain, which is a math fixing option as well as a means of healing your guy. So here's a top 32 placement from Noah. And I think this is like pretty close to where I'm at. Going for the Cornerstone Mask Ogopon, I think, is still probably the right approach with the relatively high boss count, so you can try and be proactive into Benaries or Riolus or even punching Mawwiles against a Golden Go player. The alternate is to try and add in a thin Crustal package, similar to what we saw Fernando Cifuentes do at the LAIC with, actually it was an Absol Kang build, but you have the same concept where you're going for these walling Pokemon to win the Golden Go matchup. And even though there's Lunatone Solrock in the Golden Go deck, because you play Jumbo Ice Creams and they work on your Crustal, you can play like a 2-1 Crustal line and relatively reliably win that matchup thanks to your healing options within the deck. So I think that's something that this deck could go towards if you're worried about like Mawile specifically, for example. Lopunny still gets around both, and in fact, the Cornerstone is far better than the Crustal into Lopunny because a Bravery Charm will still keep you out of range, whereas if a Lopunny is just booting through a Crustal, you're in big trouble. So that's the reason why I think Cornerstone is still probably the better route, but it does force you to find aggressive boss's orders or to like continue crispening to get your second Cornerstone down and hope that that one wins you the game, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think this archetype is really good. Its matchup data is very appealing, and it's a relatively like simplistic deck in that you're trying to get your Trolley Arven Turbo Energize going. From there, as long as you can like keep up on attachments with Crispin, you're weaving in monkeys, ice creams, and you're just a really big dude that's annoying to deal with. Pretty simple, pretty effective, and I've been really enjoying this deck. I think it's underplayed right now for its strength. In at number 7 then, we have Terrabox. This one's still around and kicking. Its matchup data is a little awkward though. When you're not great into either Guardy or Dragger Dusk, it's not super appealing, but also that Golden Go as well. So quite similar to the Lopunny in a way, but it's a bit more close, I think, in all of these situations where you definitely have avenues to win the game much more reliably into these matchups, but it's not all that easy, especially when they're so good at disrupting you and buying turns with item lock in addition to everything else. I think it's a bit awkward. Some of your better boasts are a decent time into the Charizard Pidgeot builds, also okay into Grimmsnarl. Like, these are okay scalps to take, and we know that you're going to come out the gate swinging and be quite consistent at what you do. And of course, you're one of these owl decks that is allowed to go first in a lot of situations, so you are imposing your strategy, but still like closing out games, I think, is the biggest issue for Terrabox. One tiny note I will make is that there are a number of Jelly Guardies going down to a 2-1-2 line of Gardevoir EX, at least from the highest echelon of players, and I think that would be really good to see for Terrabox. So even though it's showing as very unfavourable from the stats from Stuttgart, I think if more and more people take on the 2-1-2 Guardy EX line, I think that makes the Torrential Pump even more devastating. So just a small tiny note there, even though it's showing as one of your very poor matchups, it could be getting slightly better just based on how lists are going right now. Let's have a look at Dominic's top 64 place list. It's incorporating the Mega Mawile EX as a secondary like late game bomb. Actually, not even secondary, it's not playing the Blood Moon Ursaluna. I probably wouldn't advise that. I think Blood Moon's still really good for getting those guaranteed closes, but the Mega Mawile EX still can be a great gobble down KO option to close out games. I do think we saw from the data as well, it's not doing great into the Charizard Noctowl or anything like that, so I personally would like to go up to double Teal Mask. I think the space I'm making in this list is probably the Terrapagos EX, because you already have Mawile that can be your Cornerstone wall breaker, and I know that's not the only reason why Terrapagos is in the deck, but gaining back that more solid grass type coverage seems appealing to me. It allows you to weave in the leaves more effectively, and at the end of the day, it's still your key energy switch synergy card that you need to have for your Pikachu in a lot of instances anyway. So I would like to go back to double teal. I also think finding a space for Blood Moon is reasonable, maybe the Scrapper at that point. Although Scrapper's decent for Absol Kang as well, so I don't know what the space is right now. But this is kind of the issue with Terror Box, in my opinion, is that you have to still string yourself pretty thin to have coverage for everything in the metagame. But I do think Dominic's done a good job here of weaving in the new Mega, which can be a really good late game threat. In at number 6, we have Grimmsnarl. Grimmsnarl fights pretty evenly into Draga Dusk and Gardevoir. It's also a K into the, or pretty good into the Charizard Pidgeot, I should say. It's sort of weaker matchups. Golden Go, I think, is the key thing holding Grimmsnarl back from higher placements right now. Also seems to be a little bit awkward into the Mega Absol toolbox as the sort of mainstream worst matchups in the metagame. Let's have a look at the top 64 place here from Idan, who is copying the good old Danklin list with the 2-1 Toadscruel package. And Idan did go 1-1 into the Golden Goes they faced in Phase 2 of the competition, which shows the sort of proof of concept that Toadscruel at least causes a spanner, a bit of headache in the matchup and the way in which a Golden Go player has to go about the matchup, I should say specifically, to give you avenues into the Golden Go. And I think that's the sort of glaring issue of Grimmsnarl. The annoying thing about the Toadscruel package is that you naturally don't play much more Ball Search, so with the one Poffin, the one Artisan, and the one Ultra Ball, you still have to try and find this reliably, which is a little bit of a yikes, but I think it's, you know, shoving in a decent package here that's trying to give you the best case scenario. This is choosing, of course, to not play Frostlass, which is evident that you're changing up your stage 1 line. So you can also try and Evo into the Toadscruel if you really have to. And you're trying to make up for a bit of your damage output that you're lacking with the Binding Mochi Petrunt EX combo on your own side of things, which is definitely an interesting direction to take the deck. The main reason that's interesting about this list, not only was it the best performer in Stuttgart, but it's a very different direction to what you'd expect the deck to be, just out of acknowledgement that Golden Go is so horrific if you don't tech specifically for it. Now, even though this is a top 10 list, I do think our top 5 is pretty reliably defined and are all sort of a step above the previous 5 that we mentioned. So starting off with Absol Box then, this is one of the best decks into Gardevoir, both builds. It's also solid into Draga Dusk. It can take on Grimmsnarl and Zoroark and such, which is pretty appealing for the deck. Some of the weaker matchups, though, do include the Golden Go, which is all about which walls you have a lot of the time. Failing your walls, you can try and do the Airy Claw of Darkness shenanigans if you really want to, but none of these seem too reliable. Also, there's the Friddish Lock approach you can try and do, similar to Gardevoir. If you go Psychic Energy Friddish and just try and limit Golden Go's use of item cards so they can't superior, that's another avenue that recent Absol boxes have taken, which I think has some merit, but you can see that it's not like completely a lost cause. A lot of these Absols can still get there just by virtue of the right walling Pokemon, or if the Golden Goes are getting greedy and such. So it is an issue for the deck, but by no means something you can't overcome. The Charizard increase in the meta is a little bit more concerning, I would say, in that you have to be really careful of how and when you take your prize cards, because it's so easy for a Charizard to brute force its way through 2 Megas, especially with the Dusknoir in the deck as well. So, and the Klefki that shuts off your Psyduck. So they really do sort of like impose their strategy on you at times, which seems to be the biggest concern for the deck right now. Let's have a look at Vincenzo's top 64 place list. A pretty cookie cutter build, to be honest with you. Nothing too special going on. I love to see the 2 E-Switch coming into the deck. I think 3 Lily's a little bit high. I think I'd like to see Third Gear in here first. And just the 1 Lively, I think is probably a fine risk right now to just give yourself more reliable Turbo Energize. Yeah, pretty good list overall. Something that I love to see, that 2 Energy Switch, just because maybe I'm just not intelligent enough to play the deck with 1 E-Switch. I feel like on most turns I always want to see this card, so great to see there. And again, taking the same shell that we've seen from Tord and others in the LEIC and such, so cool list and still definitely a strong deck. And at number 4 then, we have Charizard. Now I'm going to be showing you the build with just Pidgeot Dusknoir first, then I'm also going to talk about the new Terra Dawnzard. I've also got a different matchup spread for that one, so let's have a look in more detail of this build of Charizard. This is the 3 stage 2s in that it plays Pidgeot, Dusknoir and Charizard, but doesn't have the Noctowl package in there whatsoever. And its matchup spread is looking pretty decent, to be honest with you. Good into Gardevoir and the Absol. It is very vulnerable to Draga Dusk as one of your core bad matchups. But also that Golden Go is not ideal right now as some of the sort of top decks into each other. Let's have a look at Irvin's top 8 list here. including one of the new Charmander and one of the new Charmeleon. But beyond that, pretty cookie-cutter box Zard that he's been running, you know, at the World Championships and a few other major tournaments. Does have the Briar in here for some more checkmate-style approach. Does have the Chi-Yu to give you some play into the Golden Go, which is cool. Has Defiance Ban to sort of cover for the fact that you're not playing the maximum belt and you're going for the box consistency instead. And of course does have the Tatsugiri in addition to the TM evolutions to try and get you into that game as best as possible. The couple Jet Energy alongside Klefki as well allow you to brute force your Curse Blast through, even against Psyducks. And then the deck that took Stuttgart by storm, the Dawn Zard. Just look at the matchup data here. Yes, you still have that pretty awful time into Draga Dusk, but being weak into Lopunny, Joltik Box, Kangaskhan Cones, and Flareon is like all kind of acceptable. These are all like fairly low odds picks. And when you see that you're really good into Gardevoir, really good into Golden Go as well, and also the Absol, and also good into the Charizard Mirror, that's really, really appealing for the deck. So let's take a look at the new build that we saw Nikolai take the win with, where it's included the 3/3 package of Noctowl and the 2 copies of Terapagos, as well as the Area Zero Underdepths. And the star of the show is that Dawn supporter grabbing a basic Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon. Because you're able to grab Jewel Seeker and Quick Search, this one Dawn grants you so much value. It gets you springboarding into multiple Stage 2 Pokemon, sometimes Gust on top of that with Prime Catcher, sometimes Curse Blast on top of that if you can get enough Stage 2s going. Yeah, you really can just like cascade your board from turn 2 if you're able to turn 1 Fan Rotom, turn 2 Dawn. It feels like the world is your oyster at that stage. And again, because you have the Curse Blast and the Briar in the deck, it feels like you can just like take the game away from the opponent no matter what prize race they're going for, and either really high damage Burning Darkness or just via Briar taking the game away from them on the spot. All the while, not only are you sat with Quick Search on board, but oftentimes you can float additional Hoot towards the late game, which gives you Jewel Seeker for all sorts of combos in a similar way that we've seen the Flareon builds try and sculpt perfect late games. Into our top 3 then, we have Dragapult Dusknoir. I think it's quite happy to see the rise of Charizard back into our top 5 pretty securely. It also preys on the new Lopunny archetype, which is pretty appealing for it. The biggest concerns for Draga Dusk is that you're losing ground into Golden Go. This matchup is getting far poorer just because they draw so many more cards, so get out of your Iono traps that little bit more. I think you used to have some reliability of like Jamming Tower, Counter Catcher, Iono, and Prey, but now I think because they just have so many ways to draw still like 6 or 7 cards on a turn, even without Flip the Script now, that the Golden Go can still just sort of power through you, which is something that I'm concerned about. Possibly it's a nod towards looking towards the new Moltres from Phantasmal Flames and going towards a more tool-heavy build of Draga Dusk. I know that Jamming Tower is good for a ton of different matchups, but I do think we have to acknowledge that Golden Go is like such a big threat in the game right now that I want to experiment with some like Fire, Moltres-based builds of Dragapult. That's my own personal musings right now, because I think it's a tough deck to play when you're not great into either Guardy builds or into Golden Go. I still feel like this is like a really difficult deck to pick, although you always have Iono at your disposal that can sometimes like bail you out of all sorts of situations and force a will they won't they have it situation into the late game into a number of decks. Now, that's kind of off-putting for a slower deck in the format that can't always win in a best of 3 in time because it needs those setup turns. It needs to slow the game down with Budget in a lot of cases, and you're always going to still be nail-biting how the Iono finishes, whether you win or lose. So I think there are some genuine issues with Dragapult right now, but it is undeniably still getting ridiculous results. And Alexander has been playing the same list that they won a regionals with this season to the Stuttgart Regional Championships with no new inclusions from Phantasmal Flames. I just mentioned the Moltres could be an option. That's if you're going away from Jamming Tower and towards some tools because you need to modify the Moltres. But also there's the option for Dawn to come into the deck as a decent turn 1 supporter, but also phenomenal in the mid game, and that it can either get like Fez or Horlucha alongside like more Drakloaks and more Curse Blasters, which is always like pretty appealing. So Alexander, really great list. This has a ton of accomplishments under this exact 60, so definitely the go-to build right now, unless you want to get more experimental with Phantasmal Flames and give yourself possibly a better time into Golden Go. That still seems to be the sticking point for this archetype for me right now, as well as the ever-present Gardevoir matchup, which is still looking a little dicey. Speaking of Gardevoir, let's take a look at the matchup data for both builds. This is going to be, first of all, the just Gardevoir deck with no Jellicent EX. And it is also having a pretty poor time into Gold Go right now, and it doesn't appreciate the rise of Charizard, nor does it appreciate the Absol still being in the mix. It's also fairly weak into the other dark stuff, the Zoroark and the Grimmsnarl. Interestingly, it's become more balanced into the Jellicent build, and I think that's very much in part to the Mega Diancie. I think previously this matchup was really poor for straight Gardevoir, the Finnish lock would be just so powerful, but now we have a low maintenance attacking option that, with Munkidori especially, can KO the Jellicent even without a Gardevoir EX being in play, and I think that is a big reason why the matchup has become much more balanced than it previously was in the Phantasmal Flames format. Some of the boasts for Gardevoir include that Dragapult Dust matchup. It also enjoys seeing the new Lopunny popping up, and it's just solid into the other aggressive beat sticks because it's so strong at being behind and using Ino at its disposal to then take games away with careful Adrenabrain usage throughout the game. In top 64, we had Raz coming in with a build. Now, this isn't a Jellicent build, but even the top playing straight Gardevoirs are very often opting to have that one Finnish in the deck now as well, just for the opportunity to gloom through people to either slow down the Golden Go and give you time to set up, or it gives you means of like having breathing room again a lot of the time. With Iono, with Item Lock, you give yourself that chance to make that catch up with Adrenabrains and such. So I do think this is still a really solid card. And of course, you can always catch decks out on bad hands at times. If they haven't had early game ball search, you can still try and get that finish in on key moments. So that's something that I still like to see within these lists, and it's becoming more and more common. Raz is going for the Drifloon and the Screamtail and the Diancie and the Clefairy and the Mew, so has that full attacking basic suite, so basically has a good option on any turn of the game as long as they can access it. Going for the one copy of the Garden in addition to Artisan here, and does have the Turo, which I think is probably the right move right now with the amount of clutch in the meta to give yourself a way around that if you just happen to lead an awkward Pokemon. And it can also be a way of you fixing your board as well. There are some situations where Diancie takes a hit, you can pick it up, and suddenly you're just miles ahead. So yeah, the Turo can also give you means of like doing additional Adrenabraining and stuff on certain turns. So it can be a cheeky supporter, not just here to get you through trapping situations. And then we have the build of Jelly Guardy. Now this still has that awkward time into the dark stuff, including those Charizards. It's also showing a little bit unfavored into that Gardevoir, and that's what I said. With Diancie coming out, it seems like it's winning less as the Jelly build now. But this does definitely balance the Golden Go matchup. That's the upshot of having Jellicent and why it's been in more asymmetrical top cut placements than the straight Guardy as of late, and it's also decent into the Dragapult Dustoir. It's only showing us even, though, which means you are losing a decent number of games, and I think that, again, comes down to the consistency tightrope that the Jelly build is having to walk, where a number of builds are going thinner Gardevoir lines, thicker Jellicent EX lines, and I think that just sort of eats into the hands of a Dragapult from just sweeping the game away from them. That's my own personal take. I feel like thickening the line of Gardevoir is probably the right move for the deck, but a lot of people are going quite thin on their Guardy packages these days. Like 2-1-2s really make me queasy, but hey-ho. I think going back to 3-2-2 and you would improve your matchup into Dragadusk, which I still think is definitely worth respecting. Some of the best matchups include the Raging Bolt and the Terror Box. That has been the case for a number of months now. And yeah, it seems like you do a lot with the Jellicent just to balance the Golden Go, but when Golden Go is one of the top decks in the game, that's something you kind of just have to do. Kim was able to get a 10th place finish here with that 2-2 Jelly and the Diancie. This is really sucking up a huge amount of space, but it's all in the process of trying to get that turn 1 Oceanic Gloom. It does have the Latias EX in the deck to try and help you get there, rather than the Arven plus Balloon option. In fact, very light on supporters altogether in the list. And this, honestly, like, looking at the amount of space is taken up by the physical Pokemon in the deck really makes me nervous, right? Because you're quite skimpy on support accounts. You're also skimpy on your Gardevoir line. I feel like you're teetering on consistency with this build. Now, I do know that against the Dragodusks of the world, because they are going to be trying to announce Itchy Pollen on you, you can punish that with your own Munkidori and Oceanic Gloom to an extent, but still, if you only get like 1 or 2 rolls down, that can still be a big issue. So pricing becomes an issue. Simply accessing the card can become an issue if your Artisan is bounced. So yeah, I don't know. I'm still sus. I feel like Thicker Guardy is still the way for me personally, but maybe I'm just a simple guy that wants to simply play the game and not want all of these options. I think you might have to pick your poison with a couple of these slots, to be fair. And I feel like a 2-1 Jelly is still like pretty reasonable. I don't know, that's just me. But ultimately, this was a list that did really well in Stuttgart. Let me know what you think about the way that Gardevoir has been going right now. And that just leaves our number one deck then, Golden Go. It is just ridiculously consistent in the metagame and has consistent game plans into our other top strategies in the formats. It seems to be doing well into Dragon Dusk and the more straightforward builds of Gardevoir. It's a little bit weaker into the Jelly build of Gardevoir, which you do have to acknowledge, but there are ways around this, especially with new things in Phantasmal Flames. The weakest matchups include Charizard, especially the new Noctowl build, Flareon and Alakazam. Neither of those two are super popular right now, so you're generally fairly safe in the metagame. Some of your other hurdles include the likes of Absol and Kangaskones if they have the right tech walling Pokemon. If you're respecting those tech walling Pokemon, you're going to have a great time into them, but if you can't answer their army of cornerstones, that's where you can start suffering as a deck in the format. And Ufe was our highest placing Golden Go with a top 4 placement in Stuttgart, and actually went for a straightforward build and said, if I face the walling Pokemon, I'm having a bad time. But oftentimes you'll see either a Mawile or a 1-1 Lopunny or a 1-1 Mega Lucario within the deck. To try and answer those sorts of situations. Equally, in mirror matches, you can see the Hops Cramorant coming into the deck at times as well. One thing Ufe did do was respect the Frillish lock by having the copy of Lana's Aid in the deck so that you can recover some energy cards even against a Frillish lock. So you're allowed to expend a number of energy with Superiors, or just like naturally with your Make It Rain, and be less reliant on Superior to allow you to chain knockouts onto Frillish. Alongside your Cosmic Beams and the Lana's Aid, you should have just enough to still get through a army of Frillish that a Gardevoir player is going to try and force down your throat the entire game. I do think, again, Lopunny would be great in that situation because it can, for 1 energy, just Gale Thrust through them. It can also be pretty solid into the Jellicent EX if they're going down that direction, but as soon as they evolve into Jelly EX, your boss comes live, so they probably aren't ever doing that anyway. Equally, the Lopunny seems to be probably the best option for me because it covers just more walling mons. So the Mawile is pretty much only good against Cornerstone, whereas the Lopunny is like more live in other situations. So that's just me. I think the Lopunny is like a decent choice right now. There's also the Levincia instead of Lana's if you want to go down that direction to help out against Frillish. So there are a few different builds going on right now. Ufe's gone for a really like streamlined approach, which you can never question. It does have the Monkey Dark in here, which is unorthodox. But it does allow you to do some math fixing, which is kind of cool. Maybe it allows you to Soul Rock through a number of Frillish, which might also play on the mind that it gives you better times into Gardevoir that are trying to set up math and Devo you. This can give you a bit of a punishment into that. And obviously it's another way that the Soul Rock can keep pushing through the Frillishes. So that's probably the reason why Ufe went down this direction. But there are a few different builds going on, not least to say that the A-Spec is still debated between Prime Catcher and Secret Box for the most part. And there's been some prominent players like Daniel Magda and Drew Stevenson going for Secret Box to really high placements over a number of regionals now. And they're still performing with the deck. So lots to explore with Golden Go, even though this looks like a really streamlined, straightforward build. And this was the one that went the furthest. I think there is more discussion to be had around the optimal 60 right now. That's it for our top 10 then. And like I said, I think the top 5 are an echelon above the remainder of the top 10. And in fact, you could even argue that some of the decks that you're looking at right now, the Zorro, the Flareon, those are the ones sort of on the outside looking in and maybe in the right metagame could find themselves coming back into that top 10. Zoroark has just had an abysmal performance at Stuttgart, but it has had a number of recent top 8s in the Mega Evolution format. Flareon also had a great result in the Mega Evo format, but hasn't yet really found its feet in the Phantasmal Flames meta. Maybe Charizard Dawn is a better build of this deck now, but that's still yet to be seen. Raging Bolt still has that legacy behind it where it's a consistent deck and we know what an optimal 60 basically looks like right now. And then there are some decks still to be like explored and experimented and have fun with. Toxtricity, there's really not much that has been doing well with the deck right now. There were a couple Sharpedo lists that did make phase 2 of the competition, but really not great. The Absol builds had a really poor showing. But Alakazam does get a lot from Phantasmal Flames. It does have some weird matchups though, and again it's weak into some of the stage 2s, which is off-putting, but is one of the stronger decks into Golden Go, which always gives you a starting point. And then there's that Cynthia's Garchomp that also had a really impressive finish in Stuttgart. Again, like an underplayed archetype for its strengths, and the list that we saw do well in Stuttgart was also like quite unorthodox. It played Prime Catcher and Quad Boss, and only played one of the Premium Power Pro, and stuck with good old Roserade to deal damage. So a very different take on what you'd expect from Garchomp overall. Thanks so much for watching, though. That's my top 10 for December. And we don't have a regional until January anyway, so hopefully this gave you a great starting point to get testing for the next month so that you're going to be right on it for Toronto. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.